Into the D2 Baseball Podcast. Robert Fry here, joined with today our special guest, Jeff Pelkey from Georgia College and State, taking over in the reins to start the 2026 season. Coach, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. And we'll get started with, learning about, what was that process like for you, getting this role at Georgia College?
Yeah. So, your typical process, apply, the athletic director, Wendell reached out to me and we started talking, making a connection. And then the chair of the committee, Brittany Johnson, our softball coach, she reached out and just, typical interview and was able to get on, the final. And I know there was probably some really good coaches, for this job. And but it just, for me, it was always a fit. And I think it was always a fit for them as well. A lot of very similarities with philosophies and the type of students that I've recruited, through the past, especially at Flagler and being in the Peach Belt for 8 years, some familiarity with that. So just a lot of boxes were checked, I think, through this process. And I couldn't be happier to be here and be a part of Bobcat Nation.
And speaking of, being in the Peach Belt, obviously your previous role at Flagler College in the Peach Belt, you're familiar with this league. Kind of walk me through kind of some insights you have, even though it's kind of your first coaching role at the same conference, but you understand what this conference is about.
Yeah. And it's funny because I know all the coaches and obviously, Nolan and I think, kind of came into the Peach Belt together. He was an assistant at Georgia College under, I think, Eller back in 2017 area. So, we came into the Peach Belt together. So, obviously, he got the job here a couple years later and whatnot. And so that connection's always been there. Also, Jason Burke is a good friend of mine at Lander, and Appleton's awesome over there at Columbus State, McDonald at Georgia Southwestern. So just a great group of men in this conference and great coaches. Some guys with a lot of past success, and it's very unique because you have younger coaches like myself and Nolan, and then you have older coaches that have done it for years and had a ton of success. So it's a great mix, and really excited to finally be on the other side of, Georgia College on the third base dugout side instead of the first base dugout, because a couple of years ago we were up here in the conference tournament in the championship game, and they had the walk-off homer and stuff. I was in the other dugout for that. So it'll be different going in the third base dugout now.
And, speaking of kind of your experience at Flagler, you obviously had a great opportunity to be under some coaches with some extensive head coaching experience, both in Dave Barnett and Greg Guilliams. So, under their kind of tutelage from your coaching experience, what have you learned under them that can help you apply to what you are doing in a head coaching role at Georgia College?
Yeah, no, I've been very fortunate to last 8 years to learn from them, and two different styles of how to go about things. So it was really unique to see, how they operate, how they, did recruiting, how they did player development, and how they did in-game management stuff, and between their philosophies on how they ran small ball and, handled the, lineup, and, what their thoughts were, how to, develop a lineup. Where do you, put this player? Is he more of a, top of the order, leadoff guy, bottom of the order? So just, very unique, having two different perspectives with guys that have been doing it for years. I mean, both have over 1,000 wins in their careers, and to hear about all the stories of, how it was like back in, the 90s and the early 90s, and how baseball's changed, and how, we're going from having no technology, no analytics, to all that kind of stuff, and managing that. And overall, I think between both of them, the great thing I've done is they've trusted me through those years. They've given me a lot of responsibility and opportunity to learn, to fail. So that's what I think I'm blessed most about what, Coach Guilliams and Coach Barnett is, giving me those opportunities to, either have success or have failure. And they've trusted me a lot, especially on the pitching side of it.
And, you mentioned kind of like a lot's changed from the 90s, but I kind of want to get your perspective too. What a lot has changed essentially since when you started coaching
Yeah.
in the mid 2010s. Talk a little bit about kind of your perspective of when you first started coaching versus now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, my first coaching job was at a D3 in New Hampshire, but then I started at Franklin Pierce and, under Jason King. And it's funny because, when we were doing practices and stuff, there was no Rapsodos, there was no TrackMans, there was nothing. We just showed up and went to work. And there was no, we did some data analysts like on spreadsheets and stuff, but we were punching in ourselves, like we were punching in the velos, we were punching in the strike percentage, like all that kind of stuff was all manual. Like we just did that. And then I know when I left Franklin Pierce, we had a student manager start pulling some of that data on his computer. So that's when that kind of started. And then now it's, you have all that from, so that, I think that was the biggest change from, I think I started in 2015 at Franklin Pierce to now in 2025. In those 10 years, I mean, the analytics has gone off we can track everything from, how the catcher's framing to, you name it, we can track it and analyze it. So.
And then, within that too, it's a great question is, what will be the role of analytics and in terms of player development at Georgia College under your tutelage?
Yeah. So there still will be a balance of, we will take analytics and, help through the evaluation process for us as a coaching staff. For sure, we will use it to help for development, for pitch shaping for the pitchers, kind of give a gauge of how hard guys are hitting the baseball type of thing. So we're not overcomplicating it for the guys because baseball is still a pretty simple game if you get down to the nitty gritty. But I think we can definitely use some of those tools to help guys just become overall better baseball players or better pitchers and whatnot. And it will also allow the coaching staff, especially my assistants, to learn like all the nuances of that. So that will help them develop in their careers as well, because as you go forth, there are going to be programs that really utilize technology and analytics, and there's going to be programs that don't. So the more well-rounded, coaches they can be will help them in their careers too. So.
And, speaking of, being well-rounded, you definitely have a record of, developing pitchers at an incredibly high level, with the amount of accolades that you've had in your experience with Franklin Pierce and with Flagler. So what's your role now that being a head coach? What's your role and involvement in the pitching staff at Georgia College? And like, what kind of will you prioritize within the Georgia College pitching staff?
Yeah. So, the great thing for me is, I've definitely done pitchers mostly through the years. But I've had an opportunity to also, work with some hitters and stuff, during especially days at Franklin, everywhere I've been. So I think pitching wise, it will come through me a lot, because I'm just comfortable doing that. I've been doing it for a while, like you mentioned. So I think I'll be involved a lot with the pitching staff, and catchers as well. Pitchers and catchers kind of go hand in hand, in my opinion. I don't think you can have a good pitching staff without a good catcher, and vice versa. I think the catchers can struggle if the pitchers are throwing the ball all over the place. So, it goes hand in hand there. So I'll be very involved in that. My assistants, whatever their strengths are, I'll let them do their thing with that. If they're comfortable with base running or outfield or infield, but not to micromanage, but I'll be overseeing, some of that as well. But most of my time will be made up with the pitching staff and We'll have some guys that help out with film and analyzing some of that data and whatnot when we get into individuals and bullpens. And then once we get into our 45-day come October, we'll increase, while we're throwing to hitters now. So what does that look like from the bullpen to the live mound? So, yeah.
And so within that, one side of the development side that you mentioned, we'll transition over to recruiting. What was recruiting like once you got into this role? Because I'm sure you had some roster turnover that you had to replace rather quickly. What was that like, and kind of like what's your overall strategy to recruiting now in the head role?
Yeah. Well, I'll just put it this way. There's a lot of phone calls in a short period of time. So, but so recruiting wise, obviously I've been at 4 different schools now, 2 of them private and 2 of them public. So at Flagler, private school, you're getting a good amount of Florida kids, but we were bringing in a lot of good Georgia players as well, and some out of state guys. Georgia College being a state school in Georgia, the focus is obviously, the Peach Belt states. So we are, focusing on Georgia guys, up in the Atlanta area, South of Georgia, like we're bouncing all over the place. And the great thing about Georgia College is there's a lot of high school coaches and travel ball coaches that played here. So there's already a connection that I've been very grateful to have, and talking to coaches and figuring out, what they have on their rosters and that kind of stuff. So I've had a lot of connections in Georgia already, being so close to the state line down in St. Augustine, but now it's even increased even more. And Milledgeville is a perfect spot for Georgia because it's kind of right in the center of the state. So we can hop in the car and, be places within 2 hours, most spots. So, which is really nice. So it's I think, when it comes to recruiting, I'm big in development, like I mentioned. Like I want to develop guys. I want to not just develop them as baseball players, but as students and community members and overall servant leaders. So development and recruiting good high school classes is definitely a priority. We will filter in with some JUCOs and transfer guys because, we will miss, it's part of the, recruiting is that you're going to miss guys here and there. So filtering in to make sure we're competitive year in and year out will be a thing here at Georgia College. But we will definitely focus on high school and bringing them in, developing them, and making them not just the best baseball players they can be, but the best overall servant leaders they can be.
And so you mentioned servant leaders, and I know you've been someone who prioritizes the student athlete as, people first and foremost. How do you plan to build here at Georgia College, a supportive team culture that both emphasizes the success on field, but then off the field personal growth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm very lucky because some of that stuff is already in place here with the culture and the atmosphere. I mean, Coach Belcher obviously did a great job, and the coaches before him, even going all the way back to John Kurtz. Like, I mean, there's a reason why Georgia College baseball has been so successful over the years, and it's because of the atmosphere here, and it just attracts really good student athletes. So, right off the top, like, some of the proactive stuff when the recruiting takes care of itself. So, but once they're here, it's just a constant communication with the guys. What's going on. I know I'm not a therapist or anything like that, but I will definitely, have a feel of the team and who's struggling and who's struggling in the classroom and that kind of stuff. So we can try to prevent, we can get ahead of things. That's the goal: is be proactive, get ahead of things. And just by hard work, communication, dedication, all that kind of stuff. So, and that's, I think overall, if we're doing that, we're on top of them, we're constantly in contact with them, bringing them in the office, talking through everything. I think the overall atmosphere and culture of this team will continue throughout, not just well after I'm gone here. And I mean, because there's been a lot of great coaches here, and they've all had success, and I plan on leaving that legacy as well.
And so obviously you you mentioned earlier being on the other side of the dugout of a, heartbreaking loss, but now, now you're in this role, how do you plan to kind of recreate that success similar to what Georgia College had, especially in 2024, with a Peach Belt tournament win and a super regional appearance?
Yeah, so I think having a good baseball team year in and year out, I mean, it starts with on the mound. You got to be able to pitch. You can't stop the bleeding. It's hard to win baseball games. So it starts on the mound, defense, catching and, pitching, catching, and then, infield play is very important. So we play on a pretty quick surface, so it'll be important to make sure our guys are comfortable and can play at a high level throughout the infield. And then, offensively, I don't know exactly where we are offensively. Are we, can we hit home runs? Do we hit extra base hits, or do we steal bags? Small ball team. So don't know exactly where we are yet with that. But we'll figure out what our strength is offensively and utilize that as well. So, but I think a big reason why they made the run they did, a couple of years ago is they had some really good arms, with Glanton and Wilson and, Bradley. Like those guys were really good. Brown, they had some good Donaldson out of the bullpen. Like they had Flex Kenny. Like they had some really good arms throughout that whole staff. So I think that was the big reason. We were up 4-0 with 5 outs to go, but the reason why they were still in that game because they kept pitching. They kept pitching, they kept getting out, so they kept it close enough where they could make that comeback. So that's the ultimate goal. Even if we're losing, as long as the pitchers are keeping it close, you never know what can happen. So especially with aluminum bats.
Absolutely, Coach. And the other side of it too is in the region that you were in, the Southeast region. I know in terms of the regional, it recently went up to 8 teams. And during that regional, all 8 teams, at least according to us, were ranked in the top 25. What kind of excitement brings you to be able to compete in such a competitive region now, being part of the game by game decision making process?
Yeah, no, and you had a 40-win team that didn't even get into the regional, which is crazy. So, yeah, it's a really tough region for sure. But I wouldn't want it any other way. I mean, when I was at Franklin Pierce, we came down to Cary and played in the World Series, and the Nova Southeasterns, the Landers, in that regional, like they were pretty good. I mean, you could see they were probably better than us. So that was a big reason why I wanted to come south to coach in general, because I knew some of the best baseball in the world is in the Southeast region of the United States. So. And it is tough. There's going to be in the Conference Carolinas, you're going to have 5-6 teams in the mix there. The Peach Belt's going to have 3 or 4 teams in the mix. The SAC is going to have 3 or 4 teams. So when you have an 18 regional and there's 16, 20 teams that could be in it year in and year out, it's very competitive. It's very competitive and it's tough. And if you can get into this regional and you can find a way to win it, it puts you in the head of the game, I think, in Cary. Obviously, the South is good. Obviously, with Tampa having the success they're having, and even Rollins a couple of years ago, and Lenore Ryan. I mean, they hit I don't know how many, but like they were right in the mix there. I know some Angelo State's been good. Central Missouri's a powerhouse, but. You're seeing a lot of the national champions coming from the Southeast, either the South or the Southeast regionals, year in and year out. So, but it's a very competitive. It's probably the most competitive region out there. So, but wouldn't want it any other way.
Absolutely, Coach. And that kind of brings me to the next question in terms of like scheduling. So you have, a great opportunity to schedule teams within your region and their quality opponents, day in and day out, and especially, in the time of, trying to get that bid, every game matters. So my question to you is, what's the value of scheduling those games both in region and outer region, and just the overall weight of the entire season, playing in a conference such as the Peach Belt, but also such a strong non-conference schedule that you'll have every year within your region, and being able the opportunity to schedule maybe teams out of region to enhance that.
Yeah, no, it's for the most part now, you're trying to stay in region as much as you can, in my opinion. And trying to play the best schedule you possibly can. And if you can beat teams that are in the regional or, high up in the rankings, I mean, that goes a long ways. So the days of, hey, schedule, you got to have a balance of wins. You got to win a lot of games still, but you got to have a strength of schedule that, is comparable to your wins as well. So it's a balancing act for sure. But good thing about the Peach Belt, they do 30 games for you already. So those 20, non-conference games, you definitely got to pick it, and there's budgets involved too. Like, you can't be driving all over the place. So you gotta get some of the closer games taken care of, and then you have probably roughly 6, maybe 7 games where will make or break your schedule. Maybe even less than that. So you got to really pick and choose who you want to play, and then when you play them, you just got to win. Win those games and be successful. I think we had some teams in our region this past year that they had some big wins down the stretch against some really good opponents that kind of propelled them to get into the Southeast region. So, yep.
And so within your coaching experience and even playing experience, you spent a lot of time early on in the Northeast before coming south. What in your experience kind of is some differences between, baseball in the Northeast versus baseball in the South?
A lot less shoveling snow, that's for sure. Yeah, I will say this: the teams in the Northeast are getting better because the indoor facilities are coming in. There more and more kids have access to pitching machines now, and all year round. They're taking ground balls and indoor facilities now. So I do believe the Northeast, the players up there are getting better. For the D2 aspect of it, I mean, there's a lot of schools in New England, not just Division II schools, but just schools in general. So it's very competitive recruiting wise in the Northeast, where I think there's just a lot of really good players in the Southeast still. Like, I think that's the biggest advantage of South versus North. There's still more good players for the schools down here. So and we have access to being on the field a little bit longer, for sure. But when it comes to development and guys getting better, I think the gap is closing in my opinion. But still, I still think there's a reason why we've had a lot of success in the South, for baseball, but not just at the Division II level, but at most levels.
Absolutely. Now I want to take even a further step back, and from your playing days / early coaching career, want you to kind of describe a moment to me that kind of shifted your perspective on what it means to be a leader.
That's a good question. So one of my first couple years at Flagler, we had a year where it was a struggle, and I didn't have a lot of buy-in, and it just was a struggle that year, and I had to reevaluate myself and how my coaching style was a little bit, and that's where I kind of turned. I read, obviously read some books, and I had a really good mentor at Flagler. His name's Joey Wiles, that talked to me a lot about servant leadership. We had a lot of deep conversations about that, and that kind of changed my not the baseball stuff is the baseball stuff. Like, I can teach baseball, but how to go about developing young men, I think really helped me in that transition of being a transactional coach to being more of a servant coach to the guys, and not that I don't hold them accountable and expect high standards out of them, but it's that's the big transition. I think, some of my days at Flagler, having those conversations with, mentors and reading about it. And that's been a real change for me through the years. And I think more and more coaches are wired like that now, where it's not about them. It's not about the, yes, the wins and losses, they come, but, how can we develop, these young men to be great, human beings, and to their communities, great fathers, great husbands, like that. That's what we're looking to try to do as coaches. So.
And, speaking of coaches, kind of your impact, transitioning from your playing career to your coaching career, who are some coaches or people in your life that helped impact to get you where you are today?
Yeah. So at my alma mater, Marty Tesso, he's the athletic director there now, but he was my pitching coach. He recruited me. Unbelievable, guy. I mean, great leader. Head coach there, Ken Howe, was impactful. Jason King. I learned a lot about the game of baseball from Jason King, and coaching for him for a handful of years at Franklin Pierce. Yes, we had a lot of success during those times, but I saw why, and I saw the work ethic he had, and the organization, and how he communicated with players. And he's one of the best coaches in baseball now. So like that, that's the reason why I got a ton of that he was a big mentor for me through those years. So I think those early years, I had a high school basketball coach too, Ken Irvin, that was very impactful for me. And I worked for him a little bit at Franklin Pierce because I did residential life there as well. He was when it comes to leadership and good body language and having positive energy, he was a key on that factor as well. So I've been very blessed to have people in my life that have led me down this path. And I wouldn't be sitting here today as the head coach at Georgia College State University if it wasn't for them. So I'm very fortunate. And then also another person that's helped me in a different way, because I never coached for him, but Scott Lewis, he's associate head coach at Duke now, but he was big in taking me under his wing, and him and the Southern New Hampshire guys, Pat Austin, Chris Shank, like they've all been great friends and guys that I can bounce ideas off of and whatnot. So it's been a really cool experience, having lengthy conversations with them. So, yeah.
And so the baseball community runs deep, in many different ways. Obviously, you mentioned Southern New Hampshire, another Division II school. But the final question I have for you, Coach, is the final parting thoughts for Georgia College and State. What do you want to say to the fans, the community of Milledgeville, the community of Georgia College and State University, of what to be excited about for Georgia College?
Yeah, we just had our first team meeting a couple of days ago, and the guys are really excited. It's obviously the honeymoon phase right now, but the excitement here, and the guys are in here at 6:30, 7 a.m. getting after in the weight room. We're not even in car yet, like they're unofficial, but I know they're getting in the weight room on their own. They're doing stuff already that they're off and running. Like they're excited for this season to start, and we're obviously haven't started practices yet or anything like that, but I can feel the energy. I can feel the excitement to get back on the field and compete. And they're so close already. Even the new guys that we've brought in, the freshmen and the transfers, like they're all together already, and they're hanging out and they're enjoying each other's company. I had 3 guys in the office today. One's a walk-on, one's a scholarship guy, and one's a transfer. Like they're all different backgrounds and whatnot. So they're meshing really well already. I can't, like I said, it's a honeymoon phase, but I think the fans are going to see how passionate these young men are about playing the game of baseball once we start up. So, we open up with the University of Tampa here, I think January 30th. So we got a long ways away for that, but it's I think the guys feel like it's right around the corner. So. Yeah.
And definitely a tall task indeed to start the 2026 season and your head coaching career. But Coach, sincerely appreciate you taking the time out to chat about the program, about Georgia College, and wish you nothing but the best of luck going into the 2026 season.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on, and I love Division II baseball. I follow you guys, so I appreciate everything you guys do for Division II baseball.
Absolutely. And that is head coach Jeff Pelkey of Georgia College and State.